Today I tell you why the college football playoff must be 8 teams. I let you know who I think is going to win the Heisman this year, and I pick my national champion. I'm Nathan Gustafson, and this is Clutch Time. So just a recap of my last episode where I went through the Power 5 conferences. I picked my conference winners, and I let you know who I think was going to make the playoff. I want to say there's sort of two big-name teams that don't belong to Power 5 conferences, Notre Dame and Central Florida. I didn't really mention them in the last episode. I just want to be clear that I'm not picking either of those two teams to make the playoff or to really even be in contention this year. My 4 playoff teams, as stated in the last episode, I have the 1 seed being Clemson, the 2 seed being Georgia, the 3 seed being Ohio State, and the 4 seed being Texas. Now, I have a few issues with the 14 playoff format that I wanted to go over to start this episode. For one, there's 5 Power 5 conferences, and I believe firmly that the winners of those 5 conferences deserve a bid, that being the Pac-12, Big 10, Big 12, SEC, and ACC. Now, while there's some years where different conferences are going to be on and off, sometimes it's going to feel like a conference champion doesn't really belong with the other teams, but I feel like it's there should be an obligation to those 5 conferences to put their champion in the college playoff. Okay? So when Bama lost, actually I think they lost to Auburn. They didn't make the SEC title game, but because they were a one-loss team, they still got into the playoff. And the situation that created when Bama, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Clemson were the 4 playoff teams is you had 3 different conference champions in Power 5, 2 conference champions in Power 5 conferences that didn't get to play. And most years there's going to be 1. Now, my argument isn't that Alabama team didn't deserve to make the playoff, but it creates an issue when you have 2 Power 5 conference champions, and I think one of them was a one-loss team, if I'm not mistaken, but not being allowed to make the college football playoff. It just doesn't make sense. An 8-team playoff would have minimal negative repercussions, right? And you have the players playing 1 extra game, which I guess is moderately unfortunate, but most of them are going to be in bowl games anyway. And then sort of the other argument against an 8-team playoff you hear is that it's less selective, and college football is all about regular season games meaning a lot. And I totally understand where that point of view is coming from. But another year of a 1-loss Power 5 conference champion not making the playoff doesn't seem fair to me, especially with an East Coast bias that I firmly believe exists. It often leaves Pac-12 teams struggling to get in, even though outside of Clemson, I view them as a far superior conference to the ACC. I think what it should have is the 5 conference winners are seeded 1 through 5, and 3 at-large teams, the 3 teams that the committee feels are the next best teams in the nation, should be in the playoff. So remember, my prediction for this year goes as follows: Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas. Now, under the other format that I've described for you, what my predictions would lead the playoff to being, it would look like this. Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Stanford, Alabama. Now keep in mind, if Bama were to win the SEC title game, they would simply flip spots with Georgia. That's a coin flip game to me. I think they're the 2 best teams in the nation, but like I said, because the SEC is so powerful, and particularly because the SEC West is so good this year, with A&M having consecutive top recruiting classes, LSU bringing back 3 studs on the defensive side of the ball and returning the majority of their offense, as well as bringing in a couple, like I said, stud recruits. And then you have Alabama, who's always there. They're incredible. And then Auburn, who's also a consistently good team. I think that Alabama is bound to miss one of those games. I like Georgia over them in an SEC title game, and for that reason, I have Bama on the outside this year, but you could easily switch them in Georgia. But the concept stands tall, and I have LSU as the 7 seed and Michigan as the 8. So basically, I'm saying I believe Georgia, Alabama, and LSU, the SEC represents 3 of the 4 or 5 best teams in the nation, and I think that it would be a shame for 2 of those 3 teams to not make the playoff simply because they have to play each other in the regular season. And at the same time, I think it would be a shame if more than one of those teams made it, because now you're excluding conference champions. That's why it needs to be expanded to 8. And the 8 seed on here I have is Michigan. I could just as easily have put Oklahoma in that spot. Those are roughly the teams that I think are the best or so. And Stanford, I have one in the Pac-12. That could easily be any of Stanford, Washington, or Oregon. I don't, like I said in the last episode, I don't believe USC or Utah or anyone in the Pac-12 South can beat the North. I think it would be one of those 3 teams slotted in at that 5 seed. But roughly, if these 8 teams played, I think that would create a largely entertaining college football playoff, something far superior to the 4-team format that we have now. Another issue that some people have is they think there would be a competitive imbalance, that there's a gap between the top and bottom teams. But I would argue if you look at this 8 right here, what would be matched up, we would start off with Clemson and Michigan. And Michigan would be hands down the toughest opponent that Clemson would have yet to have played during the season. I have them as a 1 seed because I believe firmly they're going to go undefeated, and they're a threat to win the national championship again. I don't not believe in Clemson's greatness. It's just the ACC is so awful, it's going to be a cakewalk for them to an undefeated record. Then we would have Georgia and LSU as a 2 and a 7. I think that's a great matchup. I think that Georgia could easily lose it. They lost to LSU last season. I think that those are 2 of the, like I said, 3 or 4 best teams in the country. Then we would have Ohio State and Alabama, and I think that Alabama would have an edge in that matchup. But certainly if someone could compete with Alabama, I think the only way that you can beat them, and it's been proven over the years, we saw it last year and we saw it when Deshaun Watson beat them, that passing the ball is the way to beat them. And I think that the high-powered Ohio State offense led by Justin Fields could certainly have the potential to beat them. And then you would have Texas and Stanford matched up in the first round as the 2 weakest Big 5 power conference, conference champions. And I think that that's a good matchup. I think that's a good game. And then slowly but surely we would, it would go over the course of 3 weeks instead of 2, which there's already a massively too large of a gap between the end of the regular season and bowl season, in my opinion anyway. This would close that gap, and it would give the champion of each conference a chance to compete for a national title, and at the same time not shaft the best teams in the nation like Alabama and LSU. I think that there are so many positives to this format. I don't know why it hasn't been done yet. If I'm Alabama, LSU, Georgia, my perspective is I have a better chance of getting in and a chance to compete for a title even if I lose one regular season game. And if I'm anyone else in the country, one of these other non-SEC conferences, my idea is, hey, no matter what, our conference champion is going to have a chance to compete. There's no reason for not every team in the country to get behind this idea, and I'm shocked that it hasn't happened yet. So moving on past the ideal world of an 8-team playoff, let's talk Heisman. This year, I think that there are roughly 7 guys who I see as legitimate threats to win it, and I can go through those 7 right now. I have Justin Herbert, Justin Fields, Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence, Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, and Jerry Jeudy. Those are the 7 guys who I think have the greatest potential to win it. I'm going to narrow that 7 down to 3. The 3 men who I believe will be invited to New York and have a chance to win it. That's Justin Fields, Tua Tagovailoa, and Trevor Lawrence. Now, each of these 3 are interesting to me. Fields, I think, is explosive. I think he's going to put up huge numbers. Same for Tua, same for Lawrence. I think what you're going to see is great numbers across the board, and the tiebreaker in the minds of the voters, I believe, will be the success that they're able to lead their teams to. And because I think Trevor Lawrence has the most advantageous regular season schedule, I believe that his team will be undefeated on their way to making it to the national title game. And for that reason, my Heisman prediction winner for this season is Trevor Lawrence. Now for my playoff predictions, like I said, at the 1 seed I have Clemson, 2 Georgia, 3 Ohio State, and 4 Texas. Sort of an interchangeable 2 seed as an SEC team. Like I said, that could be Bama, but I'm going with Georgia this year. I think they're a better, more complete team after Bama lost so much on the defensive side of the ball. In this, I have, for the first round of the college football playoff, I have 1-seeded Clemson defeating 4-seeded Texas in what will likely be not a very close game. I think that Clemson is the far superior team in that matchup. And while I think Texas rises above its Big 12 competition, I think that they'll struggle to compete with Clemson. And then I have 2-seeded Georgia going on to defeat 3-seeded Ohio State, which gives us a national championship of Clemson facing Georgia. And my Natty prediction for the 2019 college football season is that the Georgia Bulldogs will be national champions after overthrowing the reigning champions, the Clemson Tigers, in the national title game. I think that Georgia is very dominant on the defensive side of the ball. They brought back the bulk of their best players from last season. They lost cornerback DeAndre Baker, and I know that's going to hurt them a little bit, but they're a deep team that continues to bring in solid recruits. This will be Jake Fromm's third chance at having a legitimate crack at a national title, and I believe that this is the year that he takes them over the top. And I think that DeAndre Swift, like I said, he's a Heisman contender, a special running back. The way that his burst and agility and speed is outstanding. I believe him to be the best running back in the nation, and I think that he'll play a key factor in Georgia's season, and I believe at the end of the day, they will be this season's national champions. All right, that's going to be it for us today. Make sure you tune in to our next episode where I begin a 3-part series on NFL season predictions. I'm going to start off with the AFC. That'll be our next episode. Make sure you watch it, and thanks for watching, guys.